Hello, good evening from London. I'm Dennis McShane. I was Minister for Europe and spent much of my life living in France, working on French issues. And tonight I've got the great honour to have two friends, diplomats I hugely respect, talking with me and you, because really your questions are the ones that count. Now, the EU-UK Forum was set up to facilitate and nurture a constructive and informed dialogue between Britain and all of our European neighbours now that a post-Brexit agreement's been reached. It's completely non-partisan and designed to be a platform for discussion, debate and information exchange, not fighting old wars or just polemical insults. So welcome everybody, and particularly a big welcome. Delighted to welcome two of Europe's most senior diplomats, the top ambassadors of their respective countries. Sylvie Bermann, who was France's ambassador to Britain, salut Sylvie, during the Brexit years running up to the referendum and then the early years of Mrs. May, Theresa May as Prime Minister. Son Excellence, Madame Bermann, who I shall call Sylvie in sort of a little expression of lèse-majesté, was also ambassador to Russia and China. Not many diplomats around the world have had three top postings to three of the biggest countries in the world. France has now sent two ambassadors, women ambassadors, to the Court of St. James, and we're just getting round to sending our first woman ambassador to Paris. When I was in the Foreign Office as a parliamentary private secretary, then a minister, working for Robin Cook and Jack Straw and Tony Blair between 1997 and 2005, and there was an absolutely insoluble foreign policy problem to solve, the message went out, send for Ricketts. And Peter Ricketts, in due course, Sir Peter, now Lord Ricketts, was sent off to solve it. He served as ambassador to France under David Cameron and Nicolas Sarkozy. And in this UK EU Forum discussion, we all want to focus on Anglo-French or British-French relations, where they work, where they don't, and especially what might be built again post-Brexit. Sylvie Bermann has written a fine book published earlier this year called Goodbye Britannia, published by Stock, Le Royaume-Uni au défi de Brexit, UK faced with the challenge of Brexit, and Peter Ricketts just a few weeks later came up with Hard Choices, What Britain Does Next, published by Atlantic. So there we are. It's not usual for ambassadors, but still very active in policy making and thinking, to really settle down and write good solid books. And I thoroughly recommend both to anybody who's interested in diplomacy and foreign policy. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions, and I really sincerely hope I can then drop out and just call people up, come in on the chat function. I guess most of the people watching tonight were familiar with Zoom and how it all works. It's the same principle. And I hope above all the next hour belongs to you, so please keep the questions flowing. So I've already prepped Sylvia and Peter. This would be their first question, asking you both to give us three things that the Brits or the French do or say in terms of foreign policy and diplomacy, which the other capital doesn't understand or appreciate. I know we can waffle about cooperation and harmony and friendship and all that stuff, but I think what's also important is what the Foreign Office does that annoys or baffles a Quai d'Orsay, and vice versa. So ladies first, start with Sylvie. Tell me three things that the Brits do that drive you French mad.
Well, the first thing is pretty obvious. This is the intervention in Iraq, because we didn't have the same position at that time. We thought it was madness, and it proved afterwards to be so. And well, unfortunately, the Prime Minister at that time decided to follow the Americans. This is the first thing. The second one is not a thing. It's not an event. It's more well, a constant position. It's the position concerning European defense, because I think there's a lot of misunderstandings. And even if we had Saint-Malo, which is good, it was a real success. Nevertheless, each time we try to advance that in the Political and Security Committee, because I was also ambassador to this PSC, it was more difficult with the Brits, because I think they thought that we wanted a decoupling with the Americans or with NATO. And so I think there was a bit of misunderstanding, and sometimes I thought it was a bit phobic on the part of the British, but maybe Peter will say the contrary, considering the French position. And the third thing is Brexit, because even if it was not a decision of foreign policy, it had consequences, and long-term consequences, because I think we were stronger together when we wanted to deal with so many issues, and in the relationship with China or Russia, and it's a weakening of the EU. And again, it's not, it was not the reason why of this divorce, but nevertheless, it has serious consequences on foreign policy and even on our relationship.
Thank you. Well, Peter, I want you not to respond to Sylvie. You've got some excellent chapters in defense. You were, one of the great securocrats as well as classic diplomat for Great Britain. But we'll come on to that. So just give us three things that really piss off the British dip, the Foreign Office, about what the Quai d'Orsay says or does.
Okay, well, Sylvie's given you some very tough, serious issues. I'll give you a couple of examples of tradecraft, which always used to leave us frustrated, and essentially because the French are so good at it. The first is the amazing capacity of the French Foreign Office to launch initiatives on the world which are alluring, attractive, get them a lot of publicity and interest with absolutely no detail at all. And then to wait for other countries to pour cold water on them, to adjust them, and then adjust them if they have to and take the credit for them. It's not something that British ministers, perhaps excepting yourself, Dennis, would ever have accepted, to throw out on the table an issue in the vaguest of terms without defining what it means, and then to wait for the plaudits and the praise to flow in for another piece of creative, innovative French diplomacy. Now, one current example I would just mention is President Macron's proposal for a European Security Council, which sounds absolutely great until you start putting any detail on it, and then it gets much more complicated. So that's one. A second one, and it's linked in a way, is the French willingness to take risks in holding big international conferences in Paris. The number of times that the Brits have been caught short by the Quai d'Orsay announcing, we will hold a conference in the Quai d'Orsay in 2 weeks' time, bringing all the actors together in whatever crisis it is, leaving the British feeling, we missed it again. British ministers would want to know, down to every detail, how could it go wrong? What will we do if this happened? What will Parliament say? How will it look in the media if it fails? Whereas the French seem to have a wonderful ability to put an idea out there, to call a meeting, give it a go, and if it fails, well, France tried and gets the credit for trying. So those are two, and I think the third one is that the diplomatic service is consistently so good. It's our real competitor in the world, I'd say, and that can be frustrating as well. So there you go. It's a backhanded tribute to French diplomacy, but it really used to get under our skin.
Well, let's get really serious. Which embassy serves the best dinner? The British one in the Rue Faubourg Saint-Honoré or the French one in Kensington Palace Gardens?
Oh, that's a tough one, huh? That's a tough one. I think the British embassy in the Faubourg has better furniture because we bought it all with the house from Pauline Borghese in 1814. And we've added a few pieces since, but the Empire style furniture on which you sit to have dinner is, I think, superior to anything that even the French residence in Kensington has. As for the quality of the food, I'm going to defer to Madame l'Ambassadrice.
Well, I agree with you about the residence. The British residence in Paris is fantastic. But we have Kensington Gardens, which is beautiful as well. Not so much the residence, but we had a wonderful chef. And you know what Talleyrand said about that? He said, "Give me an excellent chef, it's more useful than an excellent diplomat." So maybe the diplomats could be frustrated about that, but that's true that we attach great importance to that. And if I can give you an anecdote, when I was first posted in Moscow as a young diplomat, we were accredited also in Mongolia because we didn't have an embassy there, but there was a British embassy. And the British ambassador invited us for lunch or dinner, I don't remember. And we congratulated him about the quality of the food. He said it's the first time that a British is congratulated by the French about cooking.
If it was in Mongolia, I remember a meal there, indeed, as a ministerial visit, it would have been roast lamb, and the Brits are quite good at that. Okay.
But
now,
it was more sophisticated in the British embassy. That's the reason why we loved it.
Right. Let's just turn to Brexit. You were in post, Sylvie, and I'm very interested in page 79 of your book. You say that you had dinners, you met with the bosses of the CBI, of trade unions, and many politicians, and nobody told you Brexit was going to happen. Personne ou presque au Royaume-Uni ne l'avait vu arriver. Well, you've probably completely forgotten, but I gave you this book that
I read it, yes.
2014, published in 2015, explaining exactly why Brexit would happen. I went to many embassies, American, German, other friends, and diplomats and seminars. And I must say, Peter, also, I mean, you were a very significant senior person in the British state establishment then, still are, now in the House of Lords. Why on earth did everybody think it would be a walkover for the Remain or Yes vote?
Sylvie,
I can tell
you go
you
first.
because everybody told me so, apart from some people, Lord Monks, for instance, but and even among the Brexiteers. And I remember, well, if you are considering the Remainers, I remember Jeremy Hunt, the day before the referendum, told me, he was at the French embassy, "Don't worry, we will stay." Crispin Blunt, so he's a Brexiter, told me, "Well, we want to leave, and we will but we will stay, obviously, and we will continue to annoy you. Are you sure you still want us?" And other Brexiters told me, "Well, we won't have the courage to leave." So even them didn't believe it. And if you talk to the not only the ministers, but all the MPs who had constituencies and were supposed to know what happened there, they all said, "We will stay." And everybody was surprised the day after, maybe not you, and maybe very few people. And if you remember the pollings, and except before the assassination, the murder of Joe Cox, said that there was it would be Remain, and there were a few warnings at that time, but afterwards no. And the bookmakers also, and everybody said that it would be a Remain. And if you remember, if we read the memoirs of David Cameron, it was Craig Oliver who said around midnight, David Cameron sent him a text asking, how worried should we be? I mean, he should have known, because all those people have constituencies, and they all said, yeah, but it will be Remain. So, 4 years after that, a lot of people consider because it had happened, so it was supposed to happen. But it was not the case at that time. And even Boris Johnson told David Cameron more than twice when he decided to be on vote leave, but also just on the eve of the referendum, it will not happen. So that's the reason why. I mean, I thought it wouldn't happen.
Hmm. Well, it is intriguing, isn't it? It really is. To me, it's a massive failure of our constituency system in the UK. We sent off back to their constituencies every Friday all the ministers who were MPs and assumed that they were all plugging into local feelings and were feeding back to the centre on Monday morning what was happening in the country. And yet, as Sylvie says, I think all the political leaders were taken completely by surprise. Even the Brexit leaders, I think, were taken by surprise because our system didn't pick it up. And it's a little bit like what happened with Trump in America in 2016 as well, that all the other candidates missed what he saw, which was this populist unhappiness, the brewing anger and frustration at austerity, at immigration, at loss of jobs to China, all blamed on the elite, the establishment, the system. Similarly in the UK, all blamed on Europe. And that sort of culture wars approach, campaigning on people's grievances, proved to be far more potent than I think anyone at the centre in Westminster and Whitehall understood. So I think, very interesting for future historians. Why did the British early warning radar system of the constituency MPs fail to pick this up?
Mm-hmm.
Good, a very fair point. As an MP, I wouldn't assume MPs are really necessarily that close. I mean, MPs go and talk to the people whose views they share.
Right.
I
think that's part of the problem.
What interested me was that every single referendum on Europe on the continent, in the EU this century, bar I think one in Luxembourg, maybe one in Spain, but all the other big ones were lost. France and the Netherlands said no to the constitutional treaty. The year before, Sweden said no to the euro. The Irish then said no to the Lisbon Treaty. We ended up with even the Netherlands saying no to some trade pact with, I think, Ukraine. In other words, you put Europe on the ballot paper and the voters just want to give the government of the day, just like Mr. Chirac or whoever, or Cameron, a kicking. I do think personally, the lack of political knowledge about Europe in the government after the Tony Blair left played some role. I mean, can you two ambassadors, can you go in and see your president, your prime minister, and say, sorry, you're wrong, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, you really got it wrong? Or is your obligation always to stop at that point because you are servants of the elected government of the day and not be brutal and honest with the leaders?
Well, I mean, honestly, Dennis, this is a question for the British ambassadors of British domestic politics. And I don't think any British ambassador serving abroad would feel they could second guess the Prime Minister with his network of informants, of MPs and party, could second guess the Prime Minister on British domestic politics. I mean, my job would have been to go into the British Prime Minister and say, look, you better watch out for this happening in France, because that's what I knew about. But no, a brewing crisis about Europe in the counties and towns of Britain on Europe, no. I mean, I don't think any British ambassador abroad could possibly do that.
Sylvie, were you direct with the president of France?
Well, it depends on what, but I'm supposed to be direct on like Peter said, about what was happening in the UK, about our policy. Yes, I was, but not during this time. But when I was in Russia, I had opportunity to talk to Emmanuel Macron. So I think there's some possibilities. But I think it's not because it's the EU. I think any kind of referendum would be a failure because it's the possibility for the people not to answer a question, but just to say they're angry with the government. And Sarkozy said this very well because he said, yes, they will vote no because you always vote no when you're angry. So that's the problem. So I'm not so much in favor of any kind of of referendums. But each time I had the opportunity to talk with people in Whitehall, in the Foreign Office, or even at highest level, I reminded them what happened in France in 2005. And because it was a constitution written by Giscard d'Estaing, a French. And then when we launched it, there was, I think, 65% in favor. And then we lost it. And I remember once at a dinner, which was a debate like the British like to do, and they asked me, would you have any advice? And I said, well, I'm afraid it's too late. You shouldn't organize this referendum. So I think it was very risky.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as François Mitterrand said, the problem with referendums is they always answer the wrong question, the voters.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
the questions are coming in, so shut up me. Right, here's one from, where are we? Wait a minute, there was a nice one just right at the top here. Oh, yes, from Paul Alman, former chair of Transparency International in the Netherlands. Has Brexit changed your views on the much smaller international role of both your countries? Deliver that one to Peter first, because he really has written very eloquently and interestingly in his book on that very question. Then Sylvie.
Yeah, well, yes, I do write about it. I think Brexit was a symptom of a wider anger in many countries at the mismanagement of globalization and the fact that austerity fell disproportionately on the shoulders of some citizens and not others. But I think what Brexit brings home very, very clearly is that there's a big mismatch between the way British people, British politicians often think about Britain, its weight in the world, and the reality. I'm afraid there is still too much nostalgia in our country for a period when Britain counted itself as a great power, 1940 and all that, and Britannia ruling the waves. And that is still very much there. It was there in Brexit. It's even there in the integrated review of security and defence that the government published a couple of months ago. And it seems to be very hard for many people in Britain, particularly in the political class, to come to terms with the fact Britain is no longer a great power that can speak on equal terms with, the Americas and the Chinas of the world. We are a powerful middle-sized country that has influence when we work with others and when we cooperate with allies and partners. Most of the time we do that, but I think we keep slipping back into a sense that Britain can decide, for example, to tilt towards the Indo-Pacific, and that will somehow make a difference to security or economic affairs across that vast region. So I think one of the opportunities of Brexit is to try to get people to think of Britain in the way it's seen by the rest of the world, to weigh where our real influence can be felt, to prioritize and make choices, given that we are no longer the country that many people in the UK still dream we were and are.
Sylvie, over your lifetime in service as a senior French diplomat, today, do you think France has a smaller international role than when you started, or perhaps a more influential one? I'm just curious what your own estimation might be.
Well, I think we realized that we are a middle-sized country, but we can have influence. But the reason why we are so Europeans, in fact, is because we think it's the appropriate scale. If you consider continent-sized countries such as China, Russia, United States, and so on. So that's the reason why our foreign policy is enshrined in European policy. Of course, we want to influence European policy and have ideas. Well, I remember what Peter said in his book and said at the beginning, we always have initiatives, even if it is not well prepared. And I remember when Robin Cook took office, we received someone from the policy planning, I think, and he told the diplomats, do a bit like the French, just throw out an idea and let's see how it's developing. That's what he did, by the way, about the Treaty on Small Arms in the UN, which was a success. But it's true that we take initiative, we take positions and so on, but we know that we can't do anything alone. And again, that's the reason why we regret the departure of the UK. And by the way, the UK was very influential in the EU, contrary to what is thought in the country.
Well, I would underline that. But okay, here's a question from Nick Westcott, SOAS, our big London university, one of our big international university centres in London, which also reflects a point made, a similar question, I think, by Uffe Findkjær, also from Denmark. So how long will it take for the UK and the EU to have a genuinely amicable relationship, if ever? Timelines, thoughts? Let's start with Sylvia, then give Peter a pause to think his answer.
Now, I don't know about timelines. What I know, it's a real divorce, and it's a divorce which is not by mutual consent. So usually afterwards, you have some acrimony, and it really takes time to recover. I think we will have to rebuild those relationships, but of course, you can't say how many years, but I think it's a question of years more than months. And you saw what happened in Jersey. You saw what happened concerning also the vaccine rate and so on. So I think it's going to be difficult for a while. And also, I think the Prime Minister and those who are supporting Brexit want to make a success of the Brexit and convince people that it was the right decision. And so that's the reason why, and we see that in the integrated review, there's not so many things about relationship with the EU. It's going to the Pacific, Asia Pacific, as Peter said, to America and so on. But they don't want to be really concerned with the EU. And I regret it, of course, but I'm afraid it's going to be like this for a while.
Yeah, it clearly is. And you're right, the integrated review has a large EU-shaped hole in the middle of it. And the government seemed to find it impossible to bring themselves to say anything positive about relations with the EU as opposed to with individual European countries. Yes, I would say, I mean, it's going to take a decade or so before a new generation of politicians comes into power without all the baggage of the last few years and is willing to take a fresh look at where Britain's interests really lie. I mean, I think the economic relationship is now set on being difficult, adversarial, zero-sum for some time yet. I would hope that when it is possible to start rebuilding, we can start in the area that Sylvia and I know best, which is the foreign and security policy area, where I think it is completely mystifying that the British government did not want to have any kind of structured relationship between the UK and the EU in that area. That surely is one which saner councils will prevail sooner rather than later. But I think we're waiting for a change of guard, a new generation of politicians coming in, people who grew up with Erasmus, with EasyJet, easy travel around Europe, settling and making their living wherever they wanted to in Europe, can remember the benefits of that. When those sort of people arrive in power, in a decade or 15 years from now, I think then things will look much easier. I'm not suggesting that Britain is going to apply to rejoin the EU. It seems to me to be, unthinkable. But to working towards a mature, modern, amicable, constructive relationship, yes, absolutely. And probably starting in the foreign and security policy area first, I would think.
It's interesting, just en passant, that a strongly running candidate to be the next Chancellor of Germany, I'm not sure if she'll get there, but she's certainly up in lights, is Annalena Baerbock, the head of the Green Party, very early 40, and she was an Erasmus scholar at the London School of Economics.
Voila.
So a huge generation of that sort of 40-year-old Europeans who really like England, enjoyed it, and I think if some stretch out hand happens, and not quite, I agree with Peter, not quite now.
Not quite now. And the generation of young British people who benefited from that, I think will look much more favourably on trying to repair the damage when they get the opportunity. But the bruises are so deep, they're going to take some years to begin to fade. So we shouldn't expect any great improvement, I think, for the next 8 to 10 years, I'd say.
It will come, won't it, from Britain and France, like the Entente Cordiale at the beginning of the 20th century, and then Churchill's romantic offer to fuse the two nations in the darkest hour of the summer of 1940. And again, it is Britain and France marching together, literally, not on Iraq. I mean, we can all agree on that. So it's not going to come from any other European country. If Britain re-engages with Europe, France is going to be, the re-engager, if I can put it like that.
Does Sylvie agree with that? It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think we had a close cooperation. We had this close cooperation in New York as well, because we are drafting 70% of all the resolutions. We almost agree on everything. And even on European defense, I used to say that the Germans were believers but non-observant, and then the British were observant and non-believers, because they participated in European defense. They were the first to support even the first autonomous intervention. And I think, as Peter rightly said, in the field of defense and security, there's a lot to do. We're closer to the British than to the Germans on all those issues, and so it's again, for me, it's a pity. The situation is a pity. We have to adjust to it, of course, but we will have to work more on that, and also on, yes, defense, obviously, because we have joint combined force, we have other close cooperation on nuclear armaments as well. So I think we'll try, and also it's obvious that in foreign policy issues, when we need a reaction from London, Paris, and Berlin, we will ask probably London to join, as it is the case actually on Iran. Of course, the problem will be Europe as such, the EU as such, because there could be some reactions from other countries. But yes, I think we were very close. I used to say that we were twin countries, same population, same status in the world, same nuclear status as well, and and we're thinking along on many issues.
Yeah, and the French know that if it comes to hard power, projecting military force, the only other European country that can do that with France at short notice is the UK. And I don't think that French would have any illusions that they could somehow mobilize a European defense intervention mission to go and do combat operations. That would be Franco-British in the first place. I'm sure that's right. And yet, leaving the EU, I think, has put all kinds of obstacles in the way of other UK-French defense cooperation. If I look at the defense industrial area, which was very active and very promising from 2010 with our Lancaster House agreement, now all the energy's gone out of it, really. France is building the next generation fighter jet with Germany, Britain with Italy and Sweden. We've parted company in a lot of this defense industrial area, which I think is one of the impacts of Brexit. So there are certainly limits to how far it will go. But I think in that foreign and security policy area, Britain and France are natural allies. That's right. I'm just wondering, Dennis, whether the initiative might not in the end come from a German government, which sees Britain as a partner in a lot of the economic area, kind of another free trading, transatlantic minded trading country. So I would not rule out that the first initiatives might come from Berlin, but either from Paris or Berlin, I would think, but not in the immediate future.
I followed Germany, and Germany is obsessed, I think, with exports and economic performance, and above all, today, the massive increase of investment by German firms in Russia, for example, when we keep saying Russia is the prime enemy. Our ministers say that, not analysts. And ditto on China, where we have a very powerful anti-Chinese lobby now in the House of Commons, the House of Lords, particularly on Hong Kong or perhaps any other issue. So I'm not sure. Anyway, John
No.
Peach, who both of you will know, and many of
Mm.
the I'm sure of our viewers, listeners, political Brexit editor of The Economist, and just one of the shrewdest observers of UK-EU relations, France relations over the years. He asked, do Brexit and the departure of Angela Merkel mean that France now has a chance to regain its preeminent role within the EU that it lost in the 1990s? Brackets, assuming Macron is re-elected. I think that's
Yeah.
quite a
That's
shrewd
what I wanted to
way
say
to put it.
also.
So,
Yes.
is this it really? I mean, this is France's golden moment. Particularly assuming President Macron's elected, then he's a senior statesman in Europe. He's got another clear 5-year run. There'll be a brand new chancellor, whoever it is, in Germany, and Britain out of the game. So, big chance for France to take big lead in Europe.
Well, our policy within Europe has always been being close with the Germans. We were talking about the Franco-German motor engine. I don't know how you call it in English, but it's very important. And it will depend also on our economic recovery, because that's the problem of France. We are a permanent member of the Security Council, which is not the case of Germany. Of course, we're involved in many issues with many countries and so on. But I think it's impossible to have an agreement without the Germans. So maybe, yes, he will be the senior one, and he has a lot of idea and strategic vision of what should be the EU and its relationship with other countries. But we won't be able to do anything alone. We need Germany. For the time being, Italy is stronger than it used to be before, because, well, it's Draghi, of course, and is very well respected. And I remember last position we took, was it in on Belarus? I don't remember. It was UK, France, Germany, and Italy. And it's the first time, because in the past, the Italians were always complaining about being left aside.
Yes, that is true. I think actually, technically, Dominic Raab got out a statement a bit quicker than the EU Council managed. I mean, they both said about the same thing, banning, suspending flights, not flying over Belarus airspace, and other sanctions. But yeah, I mean, you really couldn't put a cigarette paper between the EU position on Belarus and the British position on Belarus. Peter, any thoughts on that? Is it going to?
Well, I mean, I think you're right that Emmanuel Macron, if he wins next year, becomes the sort of leading European statesman, longest in office and most experienced, with all the powers that come with a French president who's just won an election. But I think, as he found in his first term, it's not much good being a leader if there are no followers. And if he's going to lead with new ideas about taking Europe forward, he needs to bring other countries with him. And I felt, looking at it from the outside, that there weren't many countries who were willing to embark with him on his Sorbonne program of further European integration in many areas. And indeed, some of the reticence was even coming, I think, from Berlin. So I think that the Macron too, if that's what we get, will have to work quite hard to make sure he can move the whole EU caravan forward, rather than always being several steps out ahead of everybody else and then looking around and finding they're not following him. It'll be a different technique he'll have to use, I think.
I think you're just writing yourself a very good job description if Mr. Macron is re-elected, Peter. So tell him what to do. Right, here's an interesting question from Steve Phillips, Secretary General of the Conference of European Directors of Roads. He says, unlike all other EU countries, even France, the UK has a much more substantial diaspora around the world, relatively little in the EU. It's actually about 2 or 3 million, it's not that small. Doesn't this have an effect on foreign policy and views? I would add, if I may, I do think that part of the Brexit notion of global Britain was the Anglosphere, that out there, English-speaking community of countries, including some, real biggies like America and India, who would naturally gravitate to Britain, take advice and leadership from Britain. Whereas poor France, it's got the Francophonie and it's got Quebec and that's about it. Any views on this idea that Britain is sort of better placed internationally thanks to English and to English diasporas?
I mean, I think it's part of Britain's soft power. Yes, we are an international, global country by history, by instinct, I think, by also population. Yes, there's a large British diaspora around the world. I think there's probably a rather large French one as well. But also importantly, there are these huge communities in the UK from many, many countries around the world, which makes us such a multicultural country here. The subcontinent in particular, but many, many countries, all the Commonwealth countries, many European countries have large diaspora here. And yeah, that is an impact on foreign policy, I think. I don't think anything can happen anywhere in the world, a crisis, a revolution, a war, a volcanic explosion, without there being British people involved, because there will be bound to be British people in that country. And there will be bound to be communities in the UK who have friends and family back home. So that's why I think countries like Britain and France can't avoid having a global foreign policy, because I think the public opinion expects the country to have global foreign policy and to react, wherever events are happening. Is it part of Britain's strength? Certainly the English language helps. Certainly British culture helps. The presence of British people around the world, yes, perhaps. Investments, I think the pattern of British investments overseas and foreign investment in the UK is very, very large proportion of our economy as well. But all that needs to be turned into policy. It needs ideas where Britain can be leading and showing we've got ideas that help other people solve their problems, as well as simply thinking about our own sovereignty, which seems to be the fixation of the current government. So it's potentially an amplifier, yes, a multiplier, but it needs real life policies to actually make it useful.
Sylvie, is the francophonie the fact
well, probably the Commonwealth is stronger than francophonie, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that they are like-minded people. And well, India is very critical about the UK, and you have other countries which are not democracies. I know because we also tried within francophonie to have the support on human rights, peaceful transitions, and so on, and it never worked. I mean, it's part of our influence, but we can't say that if we take a position, we will be supported by those countries. So if you refer to the English language, of course it is the soft power, and you will keep it even in the EU, even if it's not the native tongue of any country, but of course it's the lingua franca, and you speak it much better than we do, and we will ever do. So of course it's a superiority. And you have wonderful universities also, such as Oxford and Cambridge, and you have a lot of advantages. But again, as you say, you have to use it properly and to transform that into a policy. We mentioned Erasmus. I think it's also a pity to leave this program, because if you focus only on the Anglosphere, it means that the British will never speak another language. And speaking a language is understanding the world, and it's understanding the people. And so I'm afraid without Erasmus, it will be natural to study in the US, in Australia, in Canada. And so it's not the same, same enrichissement, I would say, cultural enrichment and understanding of other countries. And so it might lead to more isolation.
Well, the paradox is, of course, Boris Johnson speaks more than adequate French. He went to the
Absolutely.
École Internationale in Brussels. He just got married at the weekend. I think it was a surprise to me, Peter, as a devout Catholic in the Catholic Cathedral. Maybe that will make him more favourable to the Treaty of Rome. I mean, we've now got a full-on Catholic Prime Minister, a Catholic Prime Minister's wife. So who knows? Who knows? We'll see.
Who knows?
Question from Andrew Levy, tech investor. We haven't really talked about the US. We don't really want to open a big US discussion for obvious reasons. But He says, given the central importance of the US in all aspects of our security and well-being, how will the UK and France jointly work to strengthen the Euro-Atlantic alliance, notably NATO and EU? I don't think the EU is necessarily an alliance that describes the Atlantic. But Peter, if I can turn to a very interesting quote on page 198, you say it's now a clear case for NATO to have a China strategy and link up with Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. Now, I'm interested you didn't mention India in that. Now, Sylvie, you are an incredibly rare diplomat. You've served in China as ambassador, you've served in Russia, you've served here. Do you agree that NATO should take a lead in organizing policy on China?
Well, I think I share almost all the views of Peter in his book, except this one, because I don't think it's up to NATO to have a strategy towards China, because it's a multi-dimensional strategy we should have towards China. So I don't think that NATO is the proper framework for that. Our transatlantic relations, of course, are changing with the election of Joe Biden. But on Russia, it's still the Thucydides trap, and is trying to involve all the European countries to support his policy. And of course, China is a competitor, and China has bad practices. But at the same time, we won't get rid of China. It will be the first economic power within a few years, and also this idea of a blockade on high-tech issues, just to prevent China being the first one, and with some pretext. It's not always, sometimes it's security and so on, but the main reason is not having China before the US. And the other dimension is also very sorry, I can't find the word, but it's
Il y a un interprète.
Oui, allez-y en français.
No, it's very dogmatic, because it's in fact democracies against autocracies. But I think it won't work, because China won't change its model. They don't want to change our model either. And so there is this dogmatic position that we don't necessarily completely share.
Peter.
Can I just defend briefly my thesis? I'm not surprised to hear that Sylvie disagrees with it. I think some aspects of NATO is always one area where the British and French have slightly different views. I mean, my point is this: we need a Western policy on China, which tries to link up the very tough-minded American approach on security with the perhaps slightly greater interest in Europe in preserving a working commercial, economic relationship with China. There is no one place I know of where we can bring all that together. I'm not suggesting that NATO should go to China and we should expand the NATO area. I'm saying we have a political consultation machinery in NATO, which we've always had from the beginning, and that we've worked very closely over Afghanistan with Japan, with Australia, with New Zealand. They're all, and indeed with South Korea, they're all familiar to NATO. And it seemed to me that that would be quite a good vehicle for having this discussion about how to handle China as a security threat. After all, Chinese Navy is all around our waters. China has bought up Piraeus port. China is coming to Europe, is a security factor in Europe. And I wouldn't myself find it shocking for NATO to be used as a machinery for trying to get a more coordinated Western position on security aspects of China. If that won't work, then we need to find another one. But there is no obvious one which brings together all the players. And so we will continue to have a rather disparate scattergun approach to policy on China, which I think is not sustainable.
Well, that's a debate to carry on. We'll move on to another subject. I just note in passing that Britain has just sent off its brand new aircraft carrier,
Indeed.
weapon. and it's going to sail broadly in the Pacific and a bit of the South China Sea, but not through the Straits of Taiwan. Whereas President Macron sent a couple of warships through the Straits of Taiwan that separate mainland China from Taiwan in a manner that the Chinese, I think, would not be very happy with, where we are being extremely prudent, and we've got this giant dreadnought machine, modern aircraft carrier, but we're not really sort of sending it anywhere close to cause any provocative statements of any sort. Now, here's a question from Professor Juliet Lodge, now head of AI, Artificial Intelligence Ethics at SAHA, an EU firm based in also the UK. Do you think the EU and not member governments should have better protected British citizens' freedom of movement? Those from the UK who built the EU have lost so much. I would only add that decisions of third country nationals are the competence of national governments, not Brussels. So I'm not quite sure what power the EU has in that, but certainly there's a great sense of loss here about everything from travel to healthcare to having a second home or working and living in Europe. Could the EU perhaps have been a bit more generous? Sylvie?
But in fact, we wanted to be generous, and it has been refused. We proposed to have a special status for musicians, artists, and many other things, and it has been refused for reasons I don't understand. But I know, because I know some British who are in France or maybe in other countries, and that's sure it is a problem. But it's reciprocal. I mean, it's what can be accepted also by the UK regarding the EU citizens. And if you remember what happened those last days, where they've been in retention camps when they arrived, and some have been denied the entrance to the UK, it's not generosity.
Right, Peter, I'm going to ask both of you now to get the question replies down to one sentence. So I want to get as many in as possible. My fault, I've been not tough enough, Jeremy. Actually, I'll jump, if I may, to some of the questions that have been asked. There's one from Celine Pelliot, NS in Lyon, de Lyon. Do you think a Labour government would be more willing to build a new amicable relationship with the EU? Look, I'm the Labour politician here. I would say that isn't on the agenda at the moment, Celine. Toutes mes lives, je le regrette énormément, mais c'est pas dans la politique actuelle du Labour. To what extent, here's Nicolas Somai, Senior Research Fellow, Centre for Economic and Regional Studies, Institute of World Economics. To what extent has the EU's reputation as a trusted international partner been tarnished by the way in which negotiations with the EU were conducted? The Swiss at least seem to understand. I think this refers to the rupture of talks between Bern and Brussels. Was the EU a bit too hard with Britain? Paul, Peter?
Was the EU too hard with Britain? No, I don't think so. I think the tarnishing has been of the UK's reputation by taking 4 years to work out what the Brexit referendum meant, and then having this chaotic negotiation where it wasn't clear until the very last moment what the British government's objectives were. I think the EU actually coordinated a position early on, had Michel Barnier as their spokesman all the way through, and were as constructive as the British government allowed them to be. So no, the tarnishing has happened on the UK side, in my view.
No, I totally agree. And when even Boris Johnson decided not to respect his signature on the Northern Ireland Protocol, well, it's tarnishing the reputation of the country where Magna Carta took place. And so it's not the EU. The EU had an objective, which was to preserve its citizens and also the single market, and that was very clear from the beginning. But I remember when Theresa May went to Brussels and she said, "What are you proposing us?" But it was not up to the EU to propose something to the British. It's the British who wanted to leave. And as Peter said, they didn't have any kind of project. In fact, they didn't know what they wanted. And I remember many politicians, including Boris Johnson, saying, but of course we will stay in the single market. Of course we will keep the judiciary and security policy. We will stay in, in a lot of things. And finally, the decision was different, but at the beginning it was not very clear. And I think till the end, the British, the project of the Brexit was not very clear. So it was easier for Barnier to say, well, the clock is ticking, and not to change his position.
Okay, let's move away from politicians for a second. I see a question from David Pugh, project manager for Kent County Council. On page 161 of your book, Sylvie, you start a sentence with the words "Monteur invétéré," Boris Johnson. I don't ask Peter to translate that for those. I'm sure everybody listening to us understands exactly what that means. But here's David's question: what role can other actors play? Not the dips, not the politicians in Britain and France, maybe to create a new little network of good Anglo-French relations over the next 5-10 years.
So I don't really understand the question, because what is the relation? Yes.
No, it's what mechanisms could the government consider to encourage this? I think Mr. Pugh is representing Kent County Council, which of course is the county the closest to France. What other mechanisms? We're not doing Erasmus. We're slowing down on trade. We're not doing defence policy. Is there something else that could be, we'll make films together? I don't know exactly, but is there anything we can think out of the box, think laterally, that Britain and France can do to kind of restore a different, fresher network of amitié?
Yeah, I think that's what they want in Brittany or in Normandy. They would like to increase their relationship with the UK, but it has been difficult for many reasons. And the trade is not very good. There's more bureaucracy, of course, so it's difficult. And again, I mentioned the question of the musicians or the artists, because, they haven't got a status, and it's not because of the EU. We would like to have them. We love the British artists, and we'd love to have them in our festivals, and to give them the possibility to be in France on a more permanent status. But it has to be reciprocal at the same time. So I think negotiations will obviously continue. We have to solve the most difficult issues, such as Northern Ireland, or of course, or other issues like that. But afterwards, we have to discuss other ones, such as foreign and security policy, judiciary cooperation. Also, that there's a lot to do in this field, and of course, what is called soft power, all the educational also is very important, but it's more difficult now for the Europeans to go to Oxford, because it's incredibly expensive. So I'm afraid there are less candidates, which is a pity also, but it's difficult to change that. And without Erasmus, British students will come less to France or to other countries in Europe as well. But of course, Brexit was not an event, it's a process, and it will continue for years or even a decade, as Peter said.
Peter, we've got a brilliant idea of something that we've not discussed, nobody's thought of yet, that can relaunch a bit of Franco-British amitié, friendship?
Well, in the current climate, no. I mean, I think this isn't the time to be launching bold new initiatives, but I think there's a whole undergrowth of non-governmental contacts between Britain and France that we're all involved with. Culture, sport, education, interests of all kinds, professional groups. simply people who love to be together to have a festival so British or a French week in the UK. The people-to-people friendship groups, town planning groups, all that whole network of non-governmental contacts is more important now because the governmental relationship is so difficult. We can't reproduce Erasmus, that's right, but there's an awful lot of goodwill at the people-to-people level, which we should be trying to encourage and clear away the obstacles to that, like this issue about visas and cultural performers touring in Europe. That's where I would put my confidence, pending a change in the political weather.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I have to remain optimist. My 4 children are French citizens, and France is part of their future, born in France or in Switzerland. I love the country, of course. I was in Sheffield with one of them at the weekend, and a wonderful French brasserie on Eccleshall Road, which is the main sort of shopping and eating street in Sheffield. It's closed down and is now an estate agent. In the end, when it comes to selling houses, we're better at that than French cooking, perhaps. But I always say that I see Britain and France like a very, very old married couple who often think 10 times a day of killing each other, but will never dream of divorce. All right, there's been a divorce with something called the EU, but I think Britain and France exist independently of the EU, and I hope that good British-French relationship can be sustained, maintained in new and different ways. Not right now. I think Peter and Sylvia are absolutely right. But look, a great pleasure to listen to 2 of our most distinguished European diplomats, Peter Ricketts and Sylvie Berman. Thank you for sharing all your ideas. So I couldn't get all the questions in. They really were rolling in towards the end. That always happens. But I got as many as I did. And I really, really thank everybody for joining in this marvelous hour that I've certainly both enjoyed chairing, but also learnt an awful lot from. So goodbye, bonsoir, et à très bientôt.
Merci.
Au revoir.